Hey folks, Skylancer here, and for today I'll be teaching you all the fundamentals in playing League of Legends Wild Rift. So this fundamentals video will eventually turn into a series, so if you're interested in seeing more Wild Rift content from me, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you'll get updated when the next video is up. Now, before we even get started, let's make one thing clear. League of Legends Wild Rift is not League of Legends. They might look the same, they might feel the same, but essentially they're different games from each other. The map in Wild Rift is smaller, the games can be completed in a much shorter time frame compared to League of Legends PC. In a span of 15 to 20 minutes, that's one match for Wild Rift. So definitely the gameplay will be different, even the meta in the long run will be different. Another thing to note is that League of Legends Wild Rift is not Mobile Legends Bang Bang. In Wild Rift, the roles are somewhat more defined, so you really have to stick to the role you're in and not veer off from it for you to be able to contribute to the team play potential in all the phases of the match. So the first thing that you need to learn in this fundamental series guide is the different roles that you can play in League of Legends Wild Rift. Now this is a 5v5 game, so there is essentially 5 roles that you can choose from. The mid, the Baron laner, or what used to be known as the top lane, the ADC, the support, and, of course, the jungle. Now in this fundamentals video, we'll focus on the different role fundamentals so that you can actually choose from the roles that we discuss what would fit your playstyle and preference the most, and of course, how would you play your role in relation to the other team members' roles. So let's go to my favorite, which is the mid lane first. Now, the mid lane is a role that pretty much gives you a big responsibility from the get-go, as your sphere of influence in the map is larger compared to that of the other laners. You have to be aware of what's happening in the middle part of the river. You have to keep track on what's going on and what could be happening on the middle part of the jungle. So it's a big responsibility. Now, from my perspective, there are actually 2 categories that you can think of when picking your mid lane champion. And these categories are deeply connected with a term I'd like to call as champion identity. Now, I'll make a separate video in this fundamental series guide to what champion identity is and how you can go about it as you play and grind through the game. But for the purpose of this video, we'll head on straight to the categories that you can group your champions into. So for mid lane categories, the first question you need to ask yourselves is, are you a control champion? Do you have a decent level of crowd control or zoning potential that can lock down enemies or cut them off from the rest of the team? Champions like Orianna and champions like Lux, particularly mages, fall into this category. Now, the second question you need to ask yourself is, are you a burst champion? Do you have the ability to dish out a huge amount of damage in a short window of time on a singular target? So champions like Zed, champions like Katarina, and particularly assassins fall into this type of category. So when you're talking about mid lane champ selection, it's either a mage or an assassin. So before we head on to the next roles, I think this is the best time for me to tell you that when you're playing League of Legends Wild Rift on the mobile, both team perspectives will be mirrored. Now, what does this mean? It just means that whatever side you're on, you'll be playing Wild Rift in one direction. So that's from the lower left quadrant to where you're going to be starting from, which is your nexus, to the upper right quadrant where the enemy team's nexus is. And so as to avoid confusion, our next two lanes will be uniquely coined compared to what they were known to as before. So what used to be known as the top lane, or the lane nearest to the Baron Nashor camp, will now be called as the Baron lane. And the lane that was used to be known as the bottom lane, which was near the Dragon's camp, will now be known as the Dragon lane. Now, to further drill this down, if you're on the blue team, the Baron lane will be at the top and the Dragon lane will be at the bottom. The very classic look. If you're on the red team, however, it'll be inverse. The Baron lane will be on the bottom and the Dragon lane will be on the top. Now, let's proceed and talk about the Baron lane. Now, the Baron lane is known as the loneliest role you can play in League of Legends Wild Rift, primarily because there is a priority to secure the dragons early on in the game. So this means that a lot of the team skirmishes, a lot of the fights will be happening around that Dragon Lane camp, the Dragon Lane River, and somewhere in the mid lane as well. So as a Baron laner, you'll be isolated most of the time. Your objective, however, as a Baron laner is to secure an advantage with your 1v1 matchup early on and take and leverage on any lead that you can so that you can actually snowball and secure that Baron lane moving forward. But do remember that you'll be playing this Baron lane alone most of the time, aside from the occasional visits from your jungler and aside from the occasional visits from the opposing team's jungler. So you have to make sure that you are able to hold the line. Now, there are two categories from my perspective that you can think about when playing or choosing a champion for the Baron lane. Are you a tank slash damage dealing hybrid, which can be further subcategorized into the bruiser and the duelist archetype? Champions like Garen, for instance, and Darius are pretty much safe bets for the Baron lane because they're tanky enough, but they can also do a considerable amount of damage when they need to go on that all-in execute. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have the duelists. So champions like Fiora, champions like Jax are actually good Baron laners, mainly for their split pushing capability. Now, split pushing is just very simple. When your team is in a clash and in a skirmish somewhere in the other lane, you as a split pusher create pressure on another lane to generate enough threat and to make one or two champions from the opposing team to come to your lane to address the threat that you created. This easily makes for a 4v free advantage in the long run. So it's good when you're split pushing. It helps the team out. Now, the second question that you can ask yourself is, are you a gap closer? Since the Baron lane is a very long lane, a lot of chases happen between the 1v1 matchup. So champions like Camille, champions like Jin Xiao are actually good choices and safe bets for the Baron lane, primarily because of their quick, all-needed trade in to erase the opposing matchup, which makes you gain your early advantage head on. It is actually also technically viable to run a ranged champion at the Baron lane to be a bit of unorthodox in your champion selection. However, always remember that the Baron lane can be vulnerable to the visits from the opposing team's jungler, so the ganks. So you really need to make sure that you're careful because a ranged squishy type of character in the Baron lane is actually the best prey for the opposing team's jungler. So you just have to be careful. Let's talk about the Dragon lane. This is an interesting lane because this is the only two champion lane. So duos, pairs, if you have a friend, you'll most likely use this lane for your duo, primarily because of this setup. In this lane, the Dragon lane, you'll have your ADC, which is also known as the attack damage carry. Now, the ADC is defined as the champion who will eventually become a beast in the long run, in the mid to late game, which can potentially kill off an entire team. And when I say kill off an entire team, they can pretty much do a 1v9 situation and erase a team in a couple of seconds. And because of that, usually these are range marksmen. Champions like Ashe, champions like Jhin, Varus, Jinx, and Azrael. These are the champions you'll commonly see in the Dragon Lane. No champion identity question here. All the champions I've mentioned to you are champions that rely heavily on their auto attack. Their auto attack range damage. So when you're playing this role, especially when you're on the range side, kiting is one of the most valuable skills that you'll need early on, primarily because you're squishy. So shoot, go back, shoot, go back, shoot, go back, because you're squishy. And speaking of squishiness, as a means to counteract the ADC being squishy, they are usually paired with what we call as the support role. Now, contrary to popular belief, playing support is not a boring role. Support is what actually makes or breaks the game in the long run, especially during the team fights, the extended team skirmishes, and the support role is what I call a visionary too, primarily because you must be good at placing vision around. You must be good at warding. It must be your forte, not just for your lane, but creating vision for the entire team to play around with, to set up your plays. And in line with this, roaming is also very viable for a support, especially when you don't need to babysit your ADC as often anymore. But please, for the love of the Wild Rift's God, if you're playing support, you really need to augment the team. You really need to be the support role. So that means if you need to take a hit for your ADC, you take a hit. That means you also please don't also CS steal, or don't steal the last hit of your ADC in the Dragon Lane. Your ADC needs to farm and needs to get fat, and they can only do so on the Dragon Lane, and they're reliant on that. So, and your priority is to protect the ADC, to protect the team, to augment the team. So leave the last hitting and creep score to the ADC for them to be able to get fat and help the team in the long run too. Let's talk about categories. You can play mage as support. Mage enchanters like Nami, like Janna, like Soraka. They're very viable supports, primarily because their kit is really good at buffing, healing, and augmenting the team. On the other end of the spectrum, you can also play tank supports like Braum or Blitzcrank. They're very viable supports because of the added protection that they can give to the ADC and their kit as well. Plus, it's also one of the best feeling in the world if you're able to land a hook with your Blitzcrank to the enemy team. The feeling is surreal. It's amazing. Last but not least, we have whom we know as the ganker, the non-laner. People also call them the roamers, otherwise known as the jungler. Now, Wild Rift, just like any other MOBAs, have actually 4 quadrants in the map called the jungle. Now, the jungler gets stronger and gets his or her farm in gold through the jungle camps scattered around those 4 quadrants. So prioritizing your jungle pathing really should be the key priority. And because of this, the jungle role is the most unpredictable role out of all the roles, because you'll have different pathings depending on which buff you want to start off with, which lane do you want to gank first, which lane do you want to gank next. So it's very unpredictable, and it's very fun. The jungle camp and the buff timers are also something you should familiarize yourself with, because once you've done with your pathing and when you eventually go back to do the pathing again, those camps and buffs should already been up, so that you don't waste time, right? So the timing is something that's important for you, and you should familiarize yourself with that when you're the jungler. What else? Most of the time, you should be ganking who you think is winning the lane. Some of you might be thinking and you might think that it's counterintuitive because you might be asking yourselves, shouldn't I gank the lane that has this advantage, or the laner that needs help the most? Theoretically, yes, and by all means, you help them out. But Wild Rift is also about securing early leads and gaining the early advantage to snowball into success. So there's also more chances of you winning or ganking successfully the lane that is basically who you think is winning the lane most. But again, this is very situational. You do what you want, but you always have to remember that the main objective of the jungler is to set up for your laner success. So that is priority number one. You're there to help out each and every lane to the best of your ability. All right, and always ping whenever you want to gank, so that the laner who you will visit will be informed and will position accordingly and will bait the opposing matchup accordingly. So communication is also key for the junglers. Always ping when you're about to gank, and ping which lane are you ganking, so that your other laner or your team member will be informed. And for those non-junglers out there, please, for the sake of the Wild Rift gods, again, don't steal the camps and buffs of your jungler, especially in the early to mid game. You already have your lane to sustain you with farm, to sustain you with gold, so let the jungler have their means of sustaining theirs too. If you really want to get a buff, you could probably in the late game, that's okay. If you give the jungler a heads up, but don't do it in the early to mid game. Don't steal from their camps, don't steal from their buffs, because as the Baron laner you have your lane, as the mid laner you have your lane, the ADC has his or her lane as well, and the jungler needs to get strong by using the jungle camp, by pathing through the jungle camp. Let's talk about champions. Champions for the jungle can be very, very diverse. It could be a bruiser, it could be a mage, it could be an assassin. An important thing to bear in mind, however, is when you pick champions for the jungle role, one thing to keep in mind is your camp clear. So you should always be picking champions that have a good camp clear, has good enough sustain, and has gank potential. So who am I talking about? Champions like Master Yi and Lee Sin are extremely great for the jungle role, primarily because of their diverse kit. Champions like Amumu has great gank potential, and Graves has a great camp clear kit, making those two actually viable roles for the jungler. What else? I think as a last piece of advice, and you'll thank me for this, whenever you're playing the jungle role, do not forget to equip Smite. Smite is going to be your best friend. Smite will help you clear camps faster and get buffs faster, and just trust me, Smite is the way to go when you are playing the jungle role. It'll be your best friend. So, there you have it. Those are the 5 basic roles you get to play in League of Legends Wild Rift. This should be enough to get you started, and if you're interested in more Wild Rift content, I'll be uploading a series of fundamentals video that you can pretty much enjoy. Things like character identities, itemization, runes, wave management guide, warding. You'll have that from me. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so that you'll be updated when the next set of videos and content is up. And once again, this has been Skylancer, and it has been a pleasure teaching you the role fundamentals of League of Legends Wild Rift. I am really, really excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in the Rift. The open beta is gonna be amazing. This is Skylancer. See ya. Out.